Hey there, listeners. I wanted to remind everyone before we get started about our live show on Election Eve. That's Monday, November 3rd at the Comedy Cellar in New York City. It's with Nate Silver and Claire Malone, 538 Greats, and we'll have final thoughts on the contests in New Jersey, Virginia, California, and of course, New York City. It's sure to be rowdy, and we've still got some tickets left. You can snag them at gdpolitics.com. I'll also drop a link in the show notes. Looking forward to seeing you there. All right, here's the show. I forgot a really important topic. George Santos, a.k.a. Kataro Ravache, or Ravache.
Is he out?
Yeah, he's out. He got pardoned.
Right, but is he he's out? Like, it's immediate.
He's out.
Like,
he's on
he's
TV.
in the world. Okay.
Are we running for Congress again?
Talk show.
Talk show.
What else is... It's got to be talk show.
Which network?
I don't want to say because I'm afraid you're going to use this.
Oh. Hello and welcome to the GD Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Druk, and we have a lot to discuss tonight. Maine Democrats have themselves a primary contest between the current governor, Janet Mills, and a former Marine and oysterman, Graham Platner, in their bid to oust Senator Susan Collins next year. On its face, it looks like a battle for the soul of the party, though Platner's resurfaced comments on Reddit could disrupt his momentum. We're also going to take a look at what's at stake in the Voting Rights Act case the Supreme Court heard last week. Nate Cohn at the New York Times is calling it the case that could hand the House to Republicans. And we'll get some updates on the 2025 elections just 2 weeks away. It's debate season. We've now had gubernatorial debates in Virginia and New Jersey, and a meme-generating mayoral debate in New York City. Think parade politics, bodega orders, and New Yorkers' favorite kind of virtue signaling, subway ridership. Here with me to discuss it all is reporter at the Associated Press, Leah Askarinam. Welcome to the podcast, Leah.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you.
It's so great to be here with both of you.
Yes, and both referring to Chief Elections Analyst at Decisions Desk HQ, Geoffrey Skelley. Welcome to the podcast, Geoffrey.
Hey, Galen. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Are you guys ready for this elections bonanza we have today? There's so much going on.
You know, it's an off year, but it's not really.
Yeah.
There's never an off year. That's a lie.
It never stops. It never stops. Yeah. Okay, let's begin with Maine. It's the only state that Harris won in which Republicans are defending a Senate seat in 2026, and Democrats are eager to oust Susan Collins. Graham Platner, the oysterman and former Marine that I mentioned, has gotten plenty of attention online, and he's raised more than $4 million. He's also been endorsed by Bernie Sanders and has the support of progressives generally. Janet Mills is a two-term governor who has a long history as a politician in the state, and establishment Democrats have been working to recruit her into the race. She formally got in last week. So we'll talk about some of the drama that unfolded towards the end of last week, but let's set aside who runs against Susan Collins for a second. In a more abstract sense, how vulnerable is Collins in 2026?
She's vulnerable. Two things can be true. She's vulnerable, and never count out Susan Collins. It's a tough time to be running as a Republican statewide in Maine. In her last election, she won by almost 9 points, but had 51% of the vote in a ranked choice contest. So that 50% mark is huge. Once you get over that 50% mark, ranked choice voting is no longer applied. And so that does, a 9-point margin nearly over the next Democrat, but, closer to 1% over the ranked choice voting threshold in a state that the Democrats have carried on the presidential ticket for years. But also, it's Susan Collins. We had a very similar conversation in 2020, and she went on to win pretty comfortably. So it's definitely going to be one that we're watching until the very end. I would be surprised if this race fizzles out before November of 2026.
Yeah, I think Collins is definitely endangered. There's been polling on her approval rating or favorability rating that has shown her in negative territory among voters in Maine. And I think it's important to note that, in 2024, we did see a handful of split ticket results for Senate and president For example, Ruben Gallego, Democrat, won in Arizona's Senate race, even as Donald Trump was carrying the state in the presidential race. Alyssa Slotkin, a Democrat in Michigan, did that as well while Trump was winning Michigan. But I think just generally speaking, all of those were very close states where it was possible to get a split ticket outcome. I think if you're thinking about Maine, a state that was more Democratic leaning than by some distance than those states I was just talking about, Kamala Harris won it by about 7 percentage points. And that historically is definitely in the territory of a seat that the opposition party in a midterm can target and successfully flip. In fact, so going back to 1994, there have been 23 cases where the president's party was defending a Senate seat that leaned at least 5 points toward the opposition party. So Maine would qualify as one of those. And 14 of the 23 cases, so a little less than 2 out of 3, the presidential party lost the seat. So that's to say that Collins could definitely be one of those that survives in that category. But I think it speaks to the fact that for the opposition party, this is the kind of seat that they kind of have to win in a midterm environment. Because if they don't, well, for one thing, Democrats have to have Maine or they're not going to have any path to, even if they have a slim path as it is, to winning a Senate majority. So you can expect tons of money, tons of attention on that race. And I think for Democrats, at the end of the day, getting a 2-term governor who has won statewide is a pretty good recruit. That's Janet Mills. There are questions, though, because of her age and what's going on with the Democratic primary. But, it's clearly one of the top tier races in the 2026 cycle.
Yeah. So Janet Mills would be 79 upon being sworn in. That would make her the oldest freshman senator in American history. But Democrats have been working very hard to recruit her. You mentioned, Chuck Schumer most of all. And so I'm curious why national Democrats have been lobbying so hard to get Janet Mills in the race in an electoral cycle that is already a bit about generational change and this idea that the Democratic Party is too old and perhaps maybe even too establishment.
It's a good question. And actually, I've been getting this question over the last couple weeks, especially because of the Maine Senate race. Just what is it about somebody like Janet Mills that's so appealing to DC Democrats who are looking for a strong recruit? And it's hard to kind of put your finger on one specific factor, but I think we'll get more into this, I'm sure, in a moment. But she's won statewide, like Geoff just mentioned. And with somebody who's been around this long in public office, I think there's just less room for major surprises. Candidates' flaws are usually pretty well known. So people who are looking at comparing a Janet Mills at this point to a potential, Graham Platner as of a couple weeks ago had just way more information about Janet Mills, including the negative. And we've seen Democrats get burnt by that before. I'm thinking of the North Carolina Senate race in 2020.
Cal Cunningham, yeah.
Yep. That last minute, which again, it's debatable whether that would have changed the outcome. Trump still won North Carolina. I think it would have been really hard for a Democrat. All that's to say, I think if Democrats are banking on the national environment to carry them, opposition to Trump or whatever's happening with the economy and all that, the safer option is somebody who they know well. But you end up making sacrifices with that kind of thing. And like you said, would be the oldest senator ever. Is that right?
Oldest first-term senator, yeah.
Yeah. And we don't know how much age is going to be a factor in this election. And I don't think we have anything to compare it to nationally because we are in the aftermath of Joe Biden's presidency and the aftermath of Joe Biden withdrawing from the race and aftermath of that debate that made people question his ability to be in office at his age. Something that opened doors, I think, to arguments that maybe had been kind of back of mind for some members or, voters think that, they'd like Congress to be younger, but not my congressman, right? I like my congressman. And is that going to continue after the Biden presidency and that Trump-Biden debate specifically, and I have no idea. I'm just throwing it out there.
So I think for Democrats in Maine, the most obvious name to pop up for this race would have been Democratic Representative Jared Golden, who represents the 2nd Congressional District in northern Maine.
Great point.
But a couple reasons why Golden didn't end up being that candidate. For one thing, he has a past relationship with Susan Collins. He was once a staffer for her.
For a second, I was like, oh, well, like a romantic relationship.
No. In the sense that
I don't think he had a romantic relationship with Susan Collins.
No. This is more like, he had a professional relationship, has said lots of nice things about Susan Collins over the years. And so Golden would have made a lot of sense. He's won since 2018 in a district that Donald Trump has continued to carry routinely, not overwhelmingly, but it's the most Republican-leaning seat that Democrats now hold in the House based on the 2024 presidential vote. I think Trump won it by like 9 in 2024. So Golden is won on tough turf, and now Maine is, as a whole, is more Democratic-leaning than Golden's seat, which actually would make it potentially a little attractive to him because he might not have to work quite as hard to win it, plus 6-year terms instead of every 2 years. But I think with that past connection with Collins, and then the fact that he also might have had issues in a primary because he's actually got a primary challenge now in his House race because some Democrats are unhappy with him and think he's been too conservative or too moderate. And so it's not like he wouldn't have potentially had his own issues in a primary, but I do think he would have been a very strong statewide candidate. But he's not running. So for Democrats looking around in Maine doesn't have a lot of statewide elected officers. In fact, I think they just have governor, if I'm not mistaken. I mean at the state level, because their Secretary of State is appointed, their Attorney General is appointed. That's Janet Mills was Attorney General appointed by the legislature. That means that in the realm of people who've really proven themselves in a statewide election, you've got governor really to work with. And so Janet Mills sitting there is an obvious choice, having won twice now and rather comfortably in 2022. So she stands out. And, you could have looked at someone like Skelley Pingree, who's the congresswoman from the 1st District. She's been there a long time, probably doesn't want to, she's got a safe seat, probably didn't want to risk it. The flip side of this is that Democrats actually have a number of candidates running for governor in the open seat race to succeed Mills. And some of those candidates might have made perfectly fine Senate candidates, including Skelley Pingree's daughter, Hannah Pingree, who's a former state speaker of the House. But all those, or Shenna Bellows, who runs voting stuff in Maine. She's Secretary of State. So there are all these candidates who are running for governor who could have conceivably run for Senate, but running as Collins is tough, whereas you got an open seat race for governor. So all these things kind of come together to put Maine Democrats in a position where they get a few candidates kind of out of left field who no one's going to be immediately familiar with. And then there's Mills looming over it as this much better known option. So I can see why they turned to her and really wanted her to run, because she was kind of their best option remaining.
And just one more point on the recruitment thing. The Skelley Pingree point, I think, is also so interesting because she's tried this. 2002, she lost to Susan Collins.
Yep.
So, I think it's really hard to recruit somebody to run against her, considering she basically won every single one of her reelection races up until this most recent one by double digits. She has been formidable in a way that I think is really hard to compare to any other, honestly, incumbent senator. I was about to say Republican incumbent, but I think just incumbent in general at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is worth mentioning that she has never had to run in a bad midterm environment for her party.
Yep.
She was first elected in 1996, so she's seeking her 6th term, but she'd be the longest-serving senator in Maine's history if she wins. She won in 1996 in a close race. She won re-election in 2002, but that was an unusually good midterm for the president's party. George W. Bush's approval rating was in the mid-60s. And then she did win. Now, when I say that, she won in 2008 and 2020 while Democrats were winning at the presidential level. So in presidential races, she has managed to win with a lot of split-ticket voters. But in 2014, she was a Republican favorable midterm because Barack Obama was at the White House. So this is the first midterm she's had to run in with a Republican president who's not terribly popular. So that will be, I think, an interesting test for her.
Graham Platner serves as something of a foil then to both Susan Collins and Janet Mills in this instance. He's very much a political neophyte. He is a populist, whereas Janet Mills and Susan Collins may be more sort of like staid and steady, moderate institutionalists, former Marine, current oysterman. And up until the end of last week, and maybe still is the case, this appeared to be headed towards a sort of battle for the soul of the Democratic Party, where you have two very different visions. And, Graham Platner, as I said, endorsed by Bernie Sanders and other progressives, whereas Janet Mills pursued by Chuck Schumer and the likes. At the end of last week, there was reporting first from CNN about past comments that he's made on Reddit, Graham Platner, that is. And it's a range of comments that are enough to upset kind of the full range of the political spectrum, starting with racially and sexually insensitive things. Like he said, like, why don't black people tip? And said, that the victims of sexual assault should take some responsibility for themselves and not get so effed up that they wind up having sex with somebody they don't mean to. Then he went on to say other things like calling all cops bastards. And in 2018, that he wrote that if people, quote, expect to fight fascism without a good semi-automatic rifle, they ought to do some reading of history. A lot of comments on Reddit when he was...
about 30, I believe.
About 30.
Okay. Or at least, the 2013 stuff, he was in like his late 20s, early 30s.
So he responded saying, I was just back from tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I had PTSD. I was depressed. I felt disconnected from social life and community and was upset with a country that had sent me to fight battles that I was decreasingly sure had any merit, and so on and so forth. And he tells a story about how he got right. He moved home to his hometown where he started his business and met his wife, and that he is that those are not things that he believes anymore. And so I don't think it's resolved yet by any stretch what the consequences of these coming to light will be. But I don't know. Do you think you can still sort of frame this as a fight for the soul of the Democratic Party, given these two different options? Or do you think people say, okay, screw it, like we'll go with the safe option then?
I mean, I think Mills was going to be tough to beat from the get-go. I mean, think about the people who vote in a primary. They tend to be older. They tend to look more like Janet Mills. Older women are going to make up, a majority of primary electorate on the Democratic side. And, for that, that to me...
And Maine is the oldest state in the country, by the way.
Yes, Maine has the oldest average age in the country. So what I'm saying is if there were a place to, set a new record for oldest senator, Maine would make a lot of sense. I also think Mills has already maybe taken a little bit, potentially at least, taken the age thing down a notch because she says, look, I'm not running for another term after this. That's not like a hard and fast promise, it seems like, but she's basically just like, I can't imagine running again.
If I had a nickel every time I heard that, I'd have two nickels,
I know,
which is not a lot of money, but kind of weird.
But, for what it's worth, Joe Biden never explicitly said it that explicitly.
Yeah.
When he talked about, I'll be a bridge or whatever, she didn't say that. She was just like, I can't imagine running for another term after this
one. A bridge to nowhere. Let's take it back to 2008. Okay, so...
Game change.
So you seem skeptical from the outset. Leah, do you think this race is over now?
Oh, I don't think we can know that. There's no way to know that. He's still a strong fundraiser. He still, has an endorsement from like Bernie Sanders. I don't think we've seen. I think if we start seeing high profile endorsers start walking away from him, that's usually a sign of a dwindling campaign. So that's something to keep an eye out for. If his backers stay with him, I think he's running. He has money. Like, that's what it takes to run in a competitive race. And I agree with what Jeff said about how it was already going to be really tough to take out Mills in a primary, just considering the demographics of the state and the fact that she's, the governor at the moment.
And reasonably popular.
Yeah.
She's not like, this is not like an unpopular governor running.
And I do wonder if Democrats are going into this, Democratic primary voters, are they going into this strategically as in who do we think Mainers will more likely vote for? Platner or Collins, right? Or Mills or Collins. If they're thinking about it that way, then these kinds of missteps from a challenger aren't going to help make the case that he's, the candidate more likely to defeat Collins. So I think like these things kind of add up. We've seen, kind of one report. It's multiple comments, but one report at this point. It's worth watching the fallout, but also let's not inflate his strength before this incident, because I'm not saying he wasn't strong. He still clearly was a formidable fundraiser. And like I said, this year, I don't know if people are going to want to vote for, the oldest senator ever. But Janet Mills is still the governor. I think she always had a real advantage.
Yeah, to your point about that and the question of are Democrats still in this electability mindset where they're like, we just want to, out of the primary, pick whoever is likeliest to defeat the Republican, and we don't care that much about ideology or message or what have you. I think that's a big question. It seems like, according to the polling, Democrats have become more interested in, let's support the person whose policies we support, electability be damned. But this will be a test of that in some sense. There's limited polling on how Mills compares to Collins versus Platner compares to Collins, and it was conducted before the reports that I mentioned on his Reddit comments. So take this all with a grain of salt. But this gets us to a mini good data, bad data, or not data. So Zenith Research conducted a poll where they asked Mainers who they would support in the general. So in the matchup between Graham Platner and Susan Collins, it's a tie at 38% support for each. Janet Mills versus Susan Collins. Mills leads Collins by 5 points, so 42% to 37%. However, they take this a step further, and this is where the good data, bad data, or not data question comes in, and they read biographies of Graham Platner and Janet Mills to the respondents and then ask them again. And they're calling this an informed response. And I should say, what I know about the organization is that Zenith Research is more progressively aligned. This was conducted alongside More Perfect Union, which is also more progressively aligned. But nonetheless, these are the biographies that they read. They said, Graham Platner is a Marine and Army veteran, oyster farmer, and working-class Mainer running to take on the political establishment and the oligarchy. Raised in a blue-collar family, he's seen how career politicians and corporate elites rig the system against ordinary people. Platner is fighting to give working Mainers a real voice, take power back from billionaires, and rebuild an economy that puts people before profit. Okay. So I read that one first, and I was like, oh, are they going to be like, oh, Graham Platner is amazing, and like Janet Mills is awful? They give Janet Mills kind of a fair shake here. So, I guess we shouldn't smirk too much, off the bat. But they say Janet Mills, Maine's first female governor and former attorney general, is known for her steady, results-driven leadership and deep commitment to the state she calls home. She's strengthened Maine's economy, expanded affordable health care, protected reproductive rights, and invested in education, infrastructure, and clean energy, always putting practical solutions and Mainers first. Okay, so then they ask again, who do you support? Collins or Platner, Collins or Mills. In this case, Platner leads Collins by 14 points, and Mills leads Collins by 8 points. And More Perfect Union concludes after this that Platner is better prepared to take on Susan Collins in 2026. Is this good data, bad data, or not data?
I think we're going to have the same answer.
Go for it, Leah. You go first.
The informed ballot, for our purposes, bad data. If you're running a campaign and you are trying to figure out your messaging, that's a great question to ask. Do people, are they more likely to support Platner when they use people over politics? Is that a strong, alliterative message to get out there? And does it, help? Does anyone care that, Janet Mills is the first female governor? But also, an informed ballot on Janet Mills is kind of, you can't really compare those two. People know who Janet Mills is in Maine, according to their own data in that same poll. So people have already kind of know what they think about Janet Mills. They're going into this question with Platner maybe not knowing as much and basically knowing exclusively what's on the informed ballot. So I think it could be a helpful question for strategy, but not for Like, don't use this as like a head-to-head, like, oh, and this is what's going to happen. Like, don't use this as a crystal ball, obviously.
Yeah. My issue, similar to you, Leah, in terms of if we're going to call it an informed ballot, I think we also have to take it from the other side. So we've only informed respondents here about the positives. But Susan Collins has like $12 million. She's going to be able to, quote unquote, inform the public about the negatives of both of these candidates as well. And so if you want a realistic picture of what what Mainers' opinions will look like after a campaign has been waged, and Platner has been able to say his piece, Mills has been able to say his piece, and Collins has been able to say her piece, you need the negatives as well. You can't just give the positives. And so this is like a semi-informed ballot. I think it's interesting, but I do think it's somewhat motivated by the ideology of the folks. Perhaps, whatever. I don't think that was like a totally lopsided, unfair biography where it wasn't saying like, Graham Platner is Superman and Janet Mills like killed somebody. Whatever. But neither of those things are true, just for the record. Geoffrey, do you have anything to add here? Would you go so far as to say it's not data?
Well, I think it is data in the sense that, to Leah's point, it is potentially helpful information for the Platner campaign, like the kind of message that they want to push when talking about his candidacy. But I don't think it's particularly meaningful at all when it comes to thinking about the actual general election result in November 2026. So again, I think it has. This is the kind of thing that campaigns, as Leah was saying, poll for. They want to test messaging. They want to test like what issues people care about the most. Test how wording and phrasing of those messages affect people's responses. But that's not the same thing as finding out who's actually a stronger candidate especially in October of the year before the election. I just don't think it's, that would be bad data to use that as evidence.
It would be hard to use, to take any poll that's a head-to-head of this race over a year out and call it good data. Just to be clear, a lot of this is also timing.
Yeah, because what if Trump's approval ratings is 40% or 38% or something come fall 2026? It may not matter which of these two candidates is the nominee for the Democrats, and Collins may have actually decided in March, right before the filing deadline, to retire. Pull kind of an Olympia Snow did in 2012 when she unexpectedly retired instead of seeking re-election, the seat that Angus King now holds. So there's still room for things to change and affect how political actors behave. And so, there's a lot of time.
I'm having a little deja vu here. I believe there was a podcast where I think it was me and Jeff, where we were discussing the likelihood of a Biden-Trump general election ballot. And we were like, we don't find that. Don't look that up. Put that. That's gone. But
we probably said, it's obviously the most likely thing to happen because it was the most likely thing.
It was.
And then something unlikely happened.
And then something happens. It's just, this is beyond political analysis. Isn't just human being, universe vibes,
This is the happen segment of the GD Politics podcast where we talk about unknown unknowns. We used to play that a little bit where we talk about what are the known unknowns? What are the known knowns? We'll save that for another time. I was also hoping we might get to the primary race in Texas for Cornyn's seat, but I don't think we have time if we want to get to everything else we want to do. But I do just want to mention, you feel like it is an off year in the election cycle, but the Texas primary is just 5 months away. So less than 5 months away. So get ready, folks, because we got more elections coming. But let's turn to the VRA case at the Supreme Court right after this break. Today's podcast is brought to you by you, the listeners. Without paid subscribers, GD Politics wouldn't be possible. Your support means we can continue making an independent podcast guided by curiosity, rigor, and a sense of humor. We're quickly approaching the first election day since 2011, when I was a senior in college, that I haven't covered from the cocoon of a mainstream newsroom. And I couldn't be more thrilled about it. So thank you for making that possible. And to anyone considering subscribing, head over to gdpolitics.com and join the community today. You get about twice the number of episodes. You can join the paid subscriber chat and ask questions that we'll discuss on the show. And you can connect your personal feed to your favorite podcast player so you get every episode, paid and unpaid, wherever you listen to podcasts. That's at gdpolitics.com. See you there. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act appears to be up for review at the Supreme Court this term, and justices heard oral arguments last week. So Section 2 has been interpreted to mean that in places where there is racially polarized voting and minority voters are numerous enough to create a majority-minority district, states are compelled to do so. That means across the South, there are districts specifically drawn to help Black voters elect their candidates of choice. Without that interpretation of Section 2, those districts could cease to exist in many states, with significant consequences for Black representation in the House and also for Democrats in general. So there's a bit of a saga in terms of how this case arrived before the Supreme Court in this term specifically, because it was before the court last term to begin with. Geoffrey, can we do a real sort of like Spark Notes version of the backstory of this Louisiana case?
The Louisiana case came up actually right after Louisiana installed this map ahead of the 2022 elections. There was a lawsuit about it because they drew one majority-minority district, which is what they had for about 2 decades in Louisiana, 2.5 decades. And so the challenge was pushed beyond the 2022 midterms into the sort of period before the 2024 election. And eventually, federal court ruled Louisiana is about 1/3 Black in its population. And that means, yes, the state needs a second majority-minority district or a second district that gives Black voters the opportunity to elect the candidate of their choice. Because currently, or at the time, Louisiana had one majority Black seat, and the state has 6 districts. So that was less than 1/3 of the seats. So they now have 2 majority Black districts. And the second one was drawn, though, in a way that's not really that compact. It stretches from down kind of west of, Baton Rouge, basically, all the way diagonally across the state up to Shreveport in the northwest corner of the state. And the way that the district was drawn is actually similar to a district that was thrown out in the 1990s in Louisiana for being a racial gerrymander. And so this court case has arisen. I should note that they could have drawn a more compact majority-minority district, but it would have threatened, the Republicans could have, but it would have threatened Julia Letlow instead of Garrett Graves. And they liked Julia Letlow, and they wanted her to keep her seat. So they targeted Graves' seat instead, which is how you end up with this diagonal seat instead of a more compact majority Black seat in Louisiana. But the end result was that some voters in that district sued, saying, hey, this is like a racial gerrymander. And essentially what the Supreme Court is now discussing is whether the Constitution actually, whether the Voting Rights Act is sort of, Section 2 is out of date. Should there be a time limit on how long this, something like this lasts? And if so, maybe it, should no longer have application. And if Section 2 no longer had application, to your point, Galen, a number of states that have majority Black districts or have very plurality Black districts where Black voters are in a position to elect a candidate of their choice in the South, the Deep South particularly, those districts would almost certainly be destroyed basically in redraws because those are Democratic-leaning seats and Republicans control redistricting in those states. And just for basic partisan reasons, and we know the Supreme Court has ruled that partisan gerrymandering is not justiciable or is not unconstitutional, that they could get rid of those seats. And Louisiana would go from having 2 to 0, probably, if Republicans were pretty aggressive in how they drew a map there, for instance.
So I want to say that the analysis of the Voting Rights Act is kind of complicated, right? We've been saying it was interpreted to say, which is to say that in the 1960s Voting Rights Act, it was not written by Congress that in a place where there is racially polarized voting and there are enough minority voters to create a majority-minority district that you must do so. That's sort of how the court took what lawmakers wrote and applied it. This is what Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act says. So, actually, let's start with Section 1 because you sort of need that. But Section 1 says, no voting qualification or prerequisite to voting or standard, practice, or procedure shall be imposed or applied by any state or political subdivision in a manner which results in a denial or abridgment of the right of any citizen of the United States to vote on account of race or color or in contravention of the guarantees set forth in section blah, 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 as provided in subsection B. So this is the part of the Voting Rights Act that says you cannot do literacy tests, poll taxes, do any of the things that were very common across the South that, abridged Black voters' right to vote. So then they go on to section 2. A violation of subsection A is established if, based on the totality of circumstances, it is shown that the political processes leading to nomination or election in the state or political subdivision are not equally open to participation by members of a class of citizens protected by subsection A, in that its members have less opportunity than other members of the electorate to participate in the political process and to elect representatives of their choice. The extent to which members of a protected class have been elected to office in the state or political subdivision is one circumstance which may be considered, provided that nothing in this section establishes a right to have members of a protected class elected in numbers equal to their proportion in the population. Okay. So this is a complicated way of saying, yes, it is a problem, say, if 1/3 of Louisiana is Black and there are no Black lawmakers. However, you can't also claim proportional representation in the sense that if 1/3 of Louisianans are Black, 2 of the 6 congressional districts should be Black majority districts or elect Black candidates. So,
yeah, really, it's important to note that that second district came about because you can draw a district that is not outrageously drawn. You could draw a relatively compact second majority minority district in Louisiana. You don't have to, stretch it out crazily or anything. So in that sense, it's like that's like an important aspect of this where it's not proportional. It's just considering like, where do people live? Well, there's a large enough population of minority voters who are affected by this. If we don't draw this in a particular area, that there should be a second district, basically.
There's been a ton of debate over how to interpret this, what this means. When we were back at 538, did a whole series on gerrymandering where we did episodes dedicated to the Voting Rights Act. So that's what it says. I think a lot of court watchers in this moment are saying that the Supreme Court is seriously considering doing away with it, whittling it down significantly, creating some sort of sunset date. I'm curious, Leah, why it is that the sort of court watchers seem confident that the court has it out for Section 2.
If you actually listen to the hearings themselves, the tone from the justices, generally considered conservative, does seem to be questioning, whether or not this is something that needs to be in place in this year, in 2025. Was this a problem that was in the 1960s and has since been resolved? Is this a question of intentionality? Like, does it matter if somebody intentionally drew the districts to favor a particular subgroup? And just
because what Louisiana is saying is like, oh, the reason we drew it so strangely is for political reasons.
Right. And so, which is allowed, right? You can draw it that way for political reasons. You can't draw it that way because of race. And it does seem like the justices who have been, appointed by Democratic presidents are defending kind of why this existed and why it's still necessary. I can imagine listening to the core arguments that is where you expect this to go. But again, I'm not, I don't have any particular insight beyond that.
This is also something that gets tricky because race and partisanship are closely intertwined here. And so, on one hand, doing away with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act means something quite significant for Black representation in the House and in state legislatures around the country, by the way. But you'll also hear from a lot of Democrats who are concerned about winning majorities in the House who also talk about this as, well, this is going to do away with democratically held House seats and make it harder for Democrats to win a majority, whereas also at the same time, Republicans would say, okay, well, we shouldn't have a law that guarantees a certain number of Democratic seats. That's also not fair. Anyway, I want to read what Nate Cohn wrote in the New York Times as the court was hearing this case and see what you think. He writes, Without Section 2, Republicans could eliminate upward of a dozen Democratic-held districts across the South. With those new seats added to the ones Republicans already seem poised to gain, the House would not be competitive in most election years. He goes on to say, Republicans wouldn't need to flip so many districts to deal an enormous blow to Democratic chances. Even in the 7 to 8 seat scenario, Democrats might need to win the popular vote by 5 percentage points to merely have a 50-50 shot to win the House. Jeff, do you agree with that analysis?
Yeah, I think Nate was pretty spot on in the sense that the end of Section 2 in redistricting would allow states like Louisiana, where there are currently 2 majority black seats, Mississippi, Tennessee, there's 1 in each of those. There are 2 in Alabama, and there are 5 in Georgia. And the situation would be either majority black or black opportunity. Those are 2 slightly different things, but they are related, obviously. And states like South Carolina, there's 1. A lot of the states without Section 2 could axe that the seats that the Democrats hold. So the analysis that they could lose like 12 seats in the South seems pretty spot on. It might even be more, depending on how aggressive Republicans got in a place like Florida. But it's essentially like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina would almost certainly wipe out every Democratic seat, and it would not be difficult to do that whatsoever. You do not have to get too creative with line drawing. Maybe a little in Louisiana because of New Orleans being so blue, but maybe you crack it in half between 2 seats or 3 seats, and voila, there you go. Georgia, because it's got a larger population, Florida, because it's a larger population, it would be difficult to entirely take out, or North Carolina for that matter, every Democratic-leaning seat. But they could certainly just pack more Democrats in like around Atlanta if you're Georgia, and get rid of Sanford Bishop's seat and Georgia's second, which is like more rural, but close to 50% black. And so like all of this together would eliminate, roughly a dozen seats, or could eliminate a dozen seats. And I think I was going to just do some quick math where I looked at, okay, right now, the median seat in the House, and this does not account for like California changing yet or Missouri because it's just sort of up in the air, but Texas has changed its lines, is basically, if I've got this right, which I think I do, is David Schweikert's seat, who just retired or is running for governor in Arizona. It's a seat that Donald Trump carried by 3 percentage points. So that's like number 218, right smack dab in the middle of 435. And so that's a seat that's about 1.5 points to the right of the country because Trump won by about 1.5 percentage points nationally. If you had all those changes, just, not, and this is very ballpark because, we don't know exactly how it might play out, but you could end up with a situation where the median seat is actually one that Trump won by like 7 percentage points instead of 3.5 or 3. And, therefore was like 5.5 points to the right of the country. And that obviously depends on things like if that Utah map does take effect, which seems likely, but it's basically just like, and Democrats, right now, currently hold a handful of seats that will be tough to hold because of redistricting in places like Ohio, Texas, and then also Maine. Jared Golden has a primary challenge. That's a seat that maybe Republicans could flip even in a Democratic-leaning midterm year, especially if Golden isn't on the ballot. So, like, all this adds up to, yes, certainly making Democrats' lives more difficult, I think, and requiring them to win the popular vote by a much more substantial margin than they might currently have to in order to win the bare minimum for a majority.
Yeah, and I think, to be clear, it's unclear when the Supreme Court would issue a ruling on this. And regardless of when they issue a ruling, sort of when that ruling would say changes could be made or had to be made or whatnot, and when states would be able to even logistically make them happen, because primaries start in the spring, and oftentimes the Supreme Court waits until June to release opinions on cases like this. However, if they wanted to move really quickly and try to enshrine changes earlier, they potentially could. We will come back to this when the Supreme Court makes its ruling. I want to get to some 2025 elections updates before we close out the podcast for today. And I think we've each been watching slightly different things. And Leah, you've been watching something that listeners may not actually even be all that familiar with yet, which is, what is it, Texas's 18th congressional district?
How in the world could you not be up to date on Texas's 18th congressional district special? My goodness. Yeah, no, it's not exactly top of the list of national interest, especially considering these districts are all going to get carved up.
Already have been carved up.
Right. Like
all change in the next Congress. Yeah.
Right. It's all going to be different. So, but there is a special election. This is for the late Congressman Sylvester Turner's seat. It is a top two election, top two vote getters progress to a special general election unless somebody receives more than 50% of the vote. There are, I believe, about 16 candidates running, so it's going to be tough for anyone to get over 50% of the vote, but not impossible. Whoever is elected could be an interesting case study in kind of the next generation of Democrats in Congress, and like Harris carried it easily. This is like a Houston district. The question is more kind of what kind of Democrat will eventually win this and whether that will happen in a runoff or in a general election.
Okay, Geoffrey, you have been watching the New Jersey governor's race, which we've talked about before on this podcast. I don't know if it's necessarily a surprise that it's a mid-single-digit race, but it is a mid-single-digit race nonetheless. How are our buddies Jack Ciattarelli and Mikey Sherrill doing in that race?
Right. So, Mikey Sherrill, the Democratic nominee, she's a member of the U.S. House. She is the favorite to win. She's up by around 5 percentage points in the Decision Desk HQ polling average. I think some other polling averages have her up by a similar margin, 5-6 points. But that is not that's not absolutely the most comfortable lead. We actually, in 2023, 538 had an analysis about, average error in polls in gubernatorial races. And from 1998 to 2022, the average error was just shy of 5.5 percentage points. So maybe, Sherrill wins by 5-6 and it's not that close. But at the same time, it also could be closer than it looks. And I think the thought is that Sherrill has had various bits that have caused Democrats to be like, oh no, she might actually blow this thing, essentially. Because I think for Democrats with Donald Trump in the White House, New Jersey moved sharply to the right in 2024, but it still voted for Kamala Harris by about 6 percentage points. So, this is a state that Democrats, in theory, should be winning with a Republican president in the White House, and sort of there being a reaction to that kind of thing. But Ciattarelli came very close to winning as the Republican nominee in 2021, and now he's running again with perhaps more firm Republican support this time around than he had even in 2021. So I think in the wake of Trump's better performance for the GOP, there's hope that that it's possible for Ciattarelli to sort of stitch together a winning coalition. He only lost by 3 in 2021. So actually, we just published a newsletter, Decision Desk HQ, decisiondeskhq.substack.com. Let's give the promo, right? Our newsletter, I talked about basically if Ciattarelli could combine where he did best in 2021, sort of those margins, with where Trump did best, because they had two sort of somewhat different looking coalitions, where Trump did best in 2024. Trump did a lot better in some denser, more ethnically and racially diverse parts of the state, whereas Ciattarelli did better in some more affluent, wider parts. Ciattarelli could sort of combine that, winning over some of those Trump voters who turned out and get them to turn out in an off-year election, he would have a path to a narrow victory. So that's sort of the situation. It's sort of Sherrill's race to lose, but it is far from a done deal for her. And Ciattarelli has a path, and that's basically the situation here with about 2 weeks to go.
Yeah, certainly an interesting race that I'm looking forward to tracking on election day. I'll say for my part, I have been paying attention to Surprise, the New York City mayoral race, where we recently had a debate between Curtis Sliwa, Andrew Cuomo, and Zohran Mamdani. I don't know that it served to clarify people's choices any more than they already were clarified. The Decision Desk HQ polling average currently has Mamdani at 47% support. He's ticked up a tiny bit. Cuomo down a tick at 31%. And Sliwa, if anything, people have been encouraging to get out of the race. He's ticked up in his support. He's now at 15% support. And if you take him at his word, there's no way he's getting out of the race at this point. And he was just as happy to do battle with Andrew Cuomo during the debate as he was with Zohran Mamdani. At certain points, Zohran Mamdani saying that he agreed with Curtis Sliwa. NBC hosted the debate. I don't know how you guys feel your theory of debates. Does it all need to be sort of hard policy questions? Or are we down for the questions that are like, here's a mix of some of the things that they ask? What's your bodega order? How much are you paying in rent on a monthly basis? They asked, if you can't take the subway for some reason, what are you going to do? I guess you can walk, bike, take a cab, all of those things. They asked about all kinds of different, like, quirky New York things. Our gifted and talented program in the schools, which is genuine policy, not a bodega order. We heard about the guardian angels from Curtis Sliwa, what it's like to ride down in the subway, what it's like to be shot 5 times. It was a very New York spectacle. I kind of loved it. Did you guys learn anything from that spectacle?
I get a little stressed out when they ask how much stuff costs. When they're like, how much do you spend on groceries? I'm like, if I had to answer that.
They asked that as well.
Yeah, I saw that one and I was like, oh, I should really be budgeted. I should write that down. I should know that answer. And I think that's probably a sign that I should not be, a mayoral candidate. But in general,
so in that situation, do you lie on the spot and make up a number, or
there's no way I'd lie. I would never lie. I would just I feel like I would say the wrong thing. I'd be like, oh, I spend I don't know, I'm thinking about how much I spend at one grocery store. And then someone's like, but you're forgetting your entire energy bar, budget. And then I'm like, oh, forgot the energy bars. Now everyone thinks I'm lying. And it just sounds very stressful. But I do kind of like questions that they're not expecting. I didn't sign up for that. I'm not running for mayor. But if you're running for mayor, sure, you should be able to answer those questions.
Oh, parades. That was another one. And Curtis Sliwa was like, it is important that the mayor of New York shows up to every parade. And Zohran Mamdani was like, I'm not going to every parade.
Millennial energy there. I'm staying home.
Geoffrey, final word on New York's spectacle of a debate?
Just that I think it's interesting that Sliwa has been very resistant to the idea of dropping out. I also think that, for what it's worth, not all Sliwa's support would go to Andrew Cuomo, who most of Sliwa's voters probably detest nearly as much, if not as much, as they would detest Mamdani. They just don't know Mamdani as well as they know Cuomo. I mean, Republicans, Andrew Cuomo. Not the most obvious match made in heaven.
Right. To be clear, what New York Republicans know about Andrew Cuomo that has been reiterated for many years is, and again, I'm saying what they know, not what is necessarily the truth. I'm not wading into this debate. Sending people with COVID back to nursing homes, resulting in increased nursing home deaths during COVID. They know that he had some of the strictest measures in the country in terms of COVID lockdowns and not being able to do anything. In New York City, we had something called Cuomo hot dogs because you weren't allowed to just go to a bar. You had to buy food if you were going to go to a bar. So for, I don't know, however long it was, every time you ordered a drink, you had to pay an extra $1 for a hot dog, even if you didn't intend to eat it. And yeah, they know that he was a liberal icon during those early days. And what is there not to hate if you're a Republican in New York, but somebody who liberals are excited about? And then sexual harassment claims. So that is what Republicans have been told about for the past 5 years. And now they're like, I don't know, the Republicans might vote for Cuomo and get him past Mamdani.
No. I mean, look, would he get some of Sliwa's vote if Sliwa dropped out? Yeah. Would he get all of it? I seriously doubt it. And Mamdani would win 55-45.
There's also an option to not vote.
Exactly. People don't have to vote.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine that. If it were actually about the same margin as the primary, that'd be funny, actually. But I don't think that's going to happen, and Mamdani is in pretty comfortable shape to win.
Okay. Well, we're going to leave things there for today. Thank you, Leah and Geoffrey, so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks, Galen.
Thank you.
My name is Galen Druk. Remember to become a subscriber to this podcast at gdpolitics.com and wherever you get your podcasts. Paid subscribers get about twice the number of episodes and access to the video for the podcast. You can also join our paid subscriber chat and pass along questions for us to discuss on the show. Most importantly, you ensure that we can keep making this podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.